Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining to our monthly professional development webinar. My name is Ion Haile. I will be your technical moderator. I'm so happy you joined us today. Our panel topic will be using chatbots for learning and performance. I encourage you to use the chat room to introduce yourself by putting your name and from where you're joining us from. Our host is ISPI, and I will call Peter to tell us more about Ispi Potomac. Peter?
Well, yes, thank you, Sion. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever we're calling in from. I'm Peter Baverso, the president of ISPI Potomac. We are founded on the Native American lands of the Pickastawe, Nakatoic, and Manahoic peoples of North America. Originally focused primarily on the DC metro area, but more recently looking and expanding more globally to connect with people, innovators from government, education, international development, and NGOs to really share, collaborate, and co-create to help organizations improve and to create a brighter future for all of us. So we welcome new members and welcome you to the conversation. Thank you, Sion. And I'm also one of the co-sponsors from Vantivia, so my organization. And we help organizations and teams, leadership teams, become smarter, faster, and stronger through evidence-based practices to help really people live authentically in their work life. So we're on a mission to help 10 million people really live in what I call conscious courage, which is living your authentic life in the workplace. So kind of leading beyond the masks, if you will. And we're very excited to be a co-sponsor of this event. Thank you, Sion.
Thank you, Peter. Our other co-host is ICAT. ICAT is your partner for professional development, talent source, and data analytics. Service offerings by ICAT is Career Academy, outsourcing and staffing, applied data analytics, social enterprise. If you'd like to know more about ICAT, please visit the website at www.icat.net. A little reminder for the webinar tools for you to use. For clarity and better experience, we encourage everyone to mute themselves and use the chat room or raise your hands until you speak, and then you can unmute yourself when you speak. And with this, I'll pass the stage to Jonathan Tessier, who is our panel leader. Jonathan.
Thank you, Sion. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Glad you're here. On our list of topics today under chatbots, we're going to give you 3 different presentations. And to piggyback on what Sion said, I encourage all of you to share your comments as you go through this material. And if you have any questions for any of the panelists or just a general question, please, by all means, post it. We are happy to take your questions at any time. Okay, so on the agenda for today's topic, I'm going to start off talking about the instructional designer, the blueprint for training success. I think it's important that we remember that there's a human element to any type of training, especially when we're talking about new learning methods or new devices or new ways of helping to enhance a learning program. All of those are great, but we certainly don't want to lose sight of a foundation needed for that. And so we're just going to touch base on, remind everyone again about the importance of instructional designer at the core of any training program. And then I'm going to hand the baton off to Vince Hahn, who is the founder and CEO of Mobile Coach. He is going to really lead us through this whole introduction and explanation of how chatbots can be used in learning. And after Vince, we will end with Peter coming back on the line and giving us some perspective on learning here, neurobiology. And we'll see how that all ties in with what we're giving you today as well. So get ready for lots of learning, and here we go. And we'll start off with the Instructional Designer Blueprint for Training Success. Okay, next slide. So my background is in training, instructional design, coaching, and graphic design. And for many, many years, I really looked into the idea of how to make training instruction better. And I actually took and blended together my background in instructional design with my background in graphic design to really look at how visual images really enhance the learning experience as well. So I like the idea of this whole chatbot that we're going to be talking about, because there you've got something very visual and interactive that is going to help you with learning. So that's my background, and so I'm very passionate about the idea of the instructional designer and their importance in developing the whole training program. So I would like to start off with telling you a little bit about this need for what I call a blueprint. Okay, so next slide. So just for a moment, I want you to imagine a scenario here that I'm going to give you, okay? So imagine for a moment that you're about to build a house. Now, not just any house. This is going to be your dream house. And you've chosen an ideal piece of land. And I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, Sion, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Let me do this. Okay, sorry for that. So you've chosen an ideal piece of land for building your house, and the day has finally come for you to get started on it and make it happen. Now, behind you rest all the materials you will need to complete the house. There's wood, nails, bricks, windows, insulation, drywall, doors, carpet, again, everything you need. Also, you have all the laborers that you're going to need. In fact, you have so many laborers that you're going to be able to build this house in a matter of weeks instead of months. Additionally, you've been given every tool you might need for the house's construction. So shovels, hammers, saws, even a tractor to dig out the foundation of the home. So, putting it in perspective, there's not a single piece of equipment or material that is not at your immediate disposal in order to build your dream house. All that is left for you to do is to get busy building that house. And as you grab your hammer and a fistful of nails, a thought enters your mind. What am I building? What does this house look like? Where do I even begin? At this point, what do? Do you ignore the fact that you have no plan to follow, hoping instead that somewhere along the way it'll all just sort of come together and work out? And even if you decide to follow this approach, how many missteps or miscalculations or errors do you think you'll end up making during the house's construction? So at this point, it should probably dawn on you that it would be much easier to build this house if you had a design to work off of. In that moment, you make an important decision. With a wave of your hand, you stop all action, you send the laborers home, you put down your nails, you unplug your saw. You head off the construction site, hop in your car, and speed away. You decide that you will return at some point in the future to begin construction, but not until first you draw up a blueprint for the house. Now that might sound a little bit silly to think about building a house without a blueprint, but a lot of times that's how we approach a project. We don't have a plan in place. And the same is true for learning. Next slide, please. So the term blueprint has come to be referred to as a detailed plan. Now, obviously, before a house can be built, there must be a blueprint. There must be some sort of initial idea around what the house is supposed to look like, how it's supposed to function, and this needs to be done before we try and put it into existence. And it's not just for a house, right? There are many products in our lives, whether we realize it or not, that require some detailed plan in order for them to be produced. So, for example, before a film can be shot, it must first appear as words on a screenplay. Before a new car hits the road, it must first appear as lines and shapes on a drawing board. So creating an effective learning experience requires the same thing, the drawing up of a learning blueprint. And in that blueprint, we're going to incorporate all the strategies that we're going to use to make learning persuasive and memorable. And it's interesting that we tend to look at most products and think, yeah, a design had to have come first before that product was produced. But with training, we tend to think it's not that way. We tend to think, oh, how hard can it be to just present content and for participants to take notes, and there you go, you're done. They're learned. It seems like it's fairly straightforward, but it's not. Training is a product. That's the first thing we got to keep in mind. It is a product, and just like any product, the best of training means that we have to have a thoroughly designed product up front before it's ever even delivered. Next slide. So that's where the instructional designer comes into play. So designing any kind of a learning is a blend between art and science. And like architecture, there must be a blueprint for what is supposed to be accomplished in the training, how it's supposed to look, how it will play out for participants in real time, whether that's in a classroom, virtually, or e-learning. So when I think about the most successful programs, they're simple yet powerful, and there's one word that comes to mind that is common for all of those kinds of training, and that is preparation. So the more upfront preparation that is done, the more successful the learning program will be on the back end. And this is why the instructional designer is so important. In fact, instructional designers have often been referred to as the architects of the learning experience. So there's a fair amount of critical thinking that needs to happen before you can successfully launch a training program. Otherwise, you do run in the risk of missing your target and wasting a lot of time and money. So today, instructional designers must consider even more when we're talking about creating a learning program. They must integrate new and ever-expanding technology into the design and delivery of the learning. And here we have today an example of that. We have chatbots that we can now consider as a technology, a device that we can use that's going to help us support our instructional needs. It's up to the instructional designer first to identify the purpose of the training. In other words, the why are we doing this, before jumping into action with all that, well, how will this be done? So without designing first, our chances of building something wonderful are greatly diminished. The same is true for training. We must design first, and then we will deliver. And when we're designing, we'll know how to best use all the activities, all the devices, and all the new technology that is coming our way to help learners learn and remember what they've learned. So by laying that foundation for you and remembering that there's always got to be a human element to any training, now we can look at this brand new and wonderful technology that we can use in our training programs called chatbots. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Vince. Vince, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. And Jonathan, that was a great set of context, not only for chatbots, but for instructional designers in general, certainly instructional designers in today's day and age, to really have the influence on learning within organizations, need to be on the leading edge of not only understanding technology, but on how to apply different technology. So thank you for that. First, let me start by speaking for my partner in crime with this topic, David Livingston, who's a PhD and the Executive Director of Workplace Development at Kaiser Permanente. We work together to have this presentation at ISPI's annual conference, and I think through a string of events, that's how we got introduced here. And he was unfortunately not able to join today, but I am going to be representing the project that we've done together. I always like talking about topics through storytelling and through case studies, and so the bulk of my presentation today will be talking about the work that we've done together at Kaiser Permanente. So Sian, I'll ask you, I'm going to move through these slides pretty quickly, so I'll ask you to go to the next slide. Let's just take a step back just for a minute and say, what is a chatbot? Well, a chatbot is a computer program designed to simulate conversation. If you haven't tried an SMS-based chatbot, I have a QR code here up on the screen. You can point your phone at this QR code, or you can text the keyword reinforcement to the phone number 801. When most people think about chatbots, they think about web-based chatbots, and there are lots of different types of chatbots. To fully understand the use case I'm going to talk about today in terms of using a chatbot for supporting learning and performance, the mobile phone is a big part of that. And so if you haven't experienced it, I would invite you to do so here. This demo is for demo purposes only. Your number will not be used for any other purposes than supporting this demo. So if you don't have time to find your phone, maybe take a quick screenshot of the QR code, and then we will move on. So yeah, so that's a computer program designed to simulate conversation. So Sian, if we can move to the next slide. As I mentioned, most of us have had some experience with chatbots as a consumer. You will probably have had an experience going to a website, having a little icon on the bottom right-hand side of the website. The icon pops open into a chat window. And of course, maybe it's not a chatbot, maybe you're chatting with a live agent, but more and more, those initial first interactions are driven by automation. And so that's what you see on the left-hand side of this image here on the slide, a chatbot on a public website. And typically the use case of that chatbot is to answer basic FAQs, or frequently asked questions. In the middle, this middle type of chatbot is where the chatbot functions very similarly, being it's either web-based or on some sort of desktop application. But the difference is that it knows who you are. So on the left-hand side, when you go to some public website, the chatbot treats you as an anonymous visitor to that website. Whereas if you log into some sort of portal like an LMS or an intranet or an HRIS system or something like that, once you sign in, the chatbot can recognize who you are. So for example, let's say that I log into my LMS and the chat window pops open and says, "Hi Vince, welcome back. You have 3 courses left in terms of your required courses for the year," or something like that. So the messaging can be very user specific. And then this last type of chatbot on the right-hand side is having a chatbot on a common mobile messaging platform like SMS, like WhatsApp or Line or Telegram. There are dozens of messaging apps that are quite popularly used throughout the world. And when you have a chatbot on a common mobile messaging platform like that, the fundamental difference from an instructional designer perspective from that versus the first two is that now you have a persistent connection to the learner, because the learner typically always has their phone with them. And with that persistent connection, you can have the chatbot proactively send messages that are reinforcing learning. You can send quizzes, you can send reminders, you can send new content proactively to the user via that messaging channel. Whereas on the 2 web-based chatbots, those tend to be more passive user experiences, meaning they wait for the learner to go to those websites. So let me show you 3 very quickly 3 different use cases for mobile-based chatbots to hopefully describe what I mean. Let's go to the next slide, Sion, please. Thank you so much. So this one is training reinforcement, where imagine you have a chatbot that is sending you proactive messages based on some sort of training you have already received. This is a screenshot from a project we did with a well-known insurance company in the United States, where insurance agents went through some training to learn about different insurance products and policies. And so they configured a chatbot to proactively, maybe a couple times a week, send quizzes and things like that in this conversational style, to make sure that people really learned what they were supposed to learn during an e-learning course. I think that's what this was supporting. So imagine someone going through some sort of formal training, whether it's a facilitator-led training or an e-learning course, but then having a chatbot smart about that content, proactively following up and either reinforcing the content or holding the learner accountable to learning the content. The next use case on the next slide is one that's, I think, very easy to understand why it could be compelling, and that is supporting new hire onboarding. Typically when a client, when an employee starts a new job, there's so much to learn. You have to learn about your job function. There's also benefits and sort of HR related things you're trying to learn. There's also cultural acclimation that you're trying to get accustomed to into your new work environment. And what does new hire orientation look like for a lot of companies? It looks like showing up to an orientation and drinking out of a fire hose and then being wished good luck. And so imagine having a chatbot that has much more of a micro learning sensibility, that paces the content that new hire needs to consume in a way that's much more likely they'll retain it. And so, this screenshot here shows you an example of what a chatbot might say, but there's a lot of different really helpful messages that a chatbot could send to help a new employee get acclimated. The last example I wanted to show you is one of performance support on the next slide. And this is, highlights one of the important virtues of a chatbot, in that the chatbot can be one of the most frictionless sources of content for a learner. So, if I'm stuck in my job in the moment of need, I probably intellectually understand that there's a way to get an answer to my problem. I could either call someone like my manager or a peer or a subject matter expert, or I might understand that there are job aids available to me on some internal system, but all of those things require a level of friction to get to the answer. What if I could just whip out my phone and ask the chatbot a question? And so a chatbot can provide that immediacy that so many of us are accustomed to in this age of Google and impatience and wanting answers to our questions right away. And so I think performance support's a really interesting use case for a chatbot. So those are three use cases that hopefully make sense to all of you in terms of why organizations might consider using chatbots to support learning and performance. I'm going to now go into talking about the project we did with Kaiser Permanente. I'll pause here though and just encourage anyone, because I'm talking fast. If you have questions or observations, I am watching the chat as well, so feel free to put any questions into the chat. And so with that, let me talk to you about what we did with Kaiser Permanente. I met the folks at Kaiser probably 3 or 4 years ago. And they were really grappling with this idea of how to reinforce the training that they have. So one of the frequent problems that arises with traditional training solutions is the lack of information that's retained. This is the slide that their team put together. And so they say here, in fact, that up to 87% of the information just learned will be forgotten within 30 days, according to the CEB. So, this is something that they really wanted to focus on. And they were looking for solutions to expand on their existing offerings to include a reinforcement strategy that retained learning and to support application of that learning. And so that's the context. So they decided to do a chatbot test. So if we go to the next slide, Sion, the platform where they wanted to try this test was they have a program called the Grow Performance Coaching Program. GROW stands for goals, reality, options, and what's next. I think I have that right. And it's a coaching program, and it's, the target audience is non-sales, account management, and underwriting managers, and trying to give them the necessary skills and knowledge to become a successful coach, really to try to drive better performance and workplace happiness for people in those departments. Of course, this was done a couple years ago before COVID, so the program design began with a 1.5-day in-person workshop, and then after that continued with a series of virtual reinforcement sessions. Due to this program, for this program really to be successful, it did require behavioral changes from the attendees. And so consistent reinforcement was just imperative for the success of this overall program. And so because of that dynamic, Kaiser thought, hey, this could be a great program to test to see if a chatbot could really drive those types of behavioral changes and reinforce and hold the participants accountable to what they committed to during the 1.5-day in-person workshop. So that's the background of this program. So let's go to the next slide, Sion. And so they did a pilot. They called the chatbot Coach Grover. They piloted it initially with 26 participants. They designed the chatbot to be about 3 months in length, and they sent 2 to 3 messages per week. One of the important things that they did was they built a persona around the chatbot. You can see, and they actually built an avatar. You can see the icon there of Coach Grover. And one of the things that they did, which is really a great best practice when you're designing a chatbot that is more proactive and proactively pushing messages to people, is that they made sure Coach Grover set really clear expectations. So if you see on the right-hand side, the first few messages that Coach Grover sent to a new participant, it says, "Hi, I'm Coach Grover. I'll be supporting you as you begin your coaching practice. You can text stop to opt out at any time," which, by the way, that's really important to allow people to opt in and opt out. And this is going to be really fun. And it started out with a little quiz, a quick pop quiz to get us started in the GROW model. What does the G stand for? And so that was every participant's first user experience with the chatbot. And they decided to implement this chatbot through SMS. This is where they thought it would be most frictionless for those workshop participants. And of course, though, you can decide to put chatbots on a variety of many different channels like Microsoft Teams or Slack or even Zoom that we're on now. Many people around the world use WhatsApp instead of SMS. There's Facebook Messenger, of course, a lot of different channels that support chatbots. So let's go to the next slide, Sion. So this gives you a sampling of the types of messages that they programmed to be sent out to users. If you think about mobile-based messages, and if you think about the different text messages you receive, every text message you receive represents an interruption to your day. Whether that message is coming from your family member or a colleague or a friend or your dentist office, an incoming message is an interruption. And so when you decide to deploy a chatbot, which is an automated interruption, it becomes imperative that those messages feel valuable. If they don't, then you risk it feeling spammy and people really getting turned off by that. And that dovetails really into what Jonathan was talking about earlier. That's the role of an instructional designer, to strike that appropriate balance. And one of the things that I think Kaiser did really well in their design was putting in a lot of fun personality into their chatbot, which played into, feeling good, having some positive emotions when you got that interruption. So you can see here, they actually had an illustrator create really fun, friendly looking illustrations to send along with the messages. And I'm not going to read these different messages because you can read them, but you can get a sense of the types of things that were sent out. There are videos, there are quizzes, there are survey questions. So that gives you a sense of the types of messages that that you received. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, these messages were spread out, just a couple times a week over 12 weeks. So how did this do? Let's go to the next slide. Here are the results from the survey that was sent to participants. So 70%, they asked all the participants, and let me back up and just say, after the initial 26 participants, this got expanded to about another 96 people. So anyway, they asked a couple questions. How did you feel about the frequency of Coach Grover's messages? So you could see 70% thought it was just right, and 30% thought it was a bit too often. Let's just click, because there's Sion, if you could just click the slide, because there's an animation for the next result. And I apologize in advance that the numbers got muddled up here. I'll read them for you. So how did you feel about the length of time, so about 3 months spent with Coach Grover? So 60% thought it was just right. 30% thought it was a bit long. And interestingly to them, 10% actually wanted it to go even longer. So they saw the value there with the length of that program. So let's go to the next slide. They also wanted to have the participants rate the quality of the content. And so the participants gave it 4.7 stars out of 5. And so let's click on the slide here. Some of you, well, here on the scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the most useful, which types of text messages did you find most useful? You can see the order of how the participants ranked it. People saw the most value in quick coaching tips, then short videos, and then getting emails with additional resources and reinforcement quizzes, and lastly, reminders to begin and continue coaching. And then one more animation on this slide, Sion, please. Some of you may be familiar with a Net Promoter Score, or sometimes known as NPS Score. 50 tends a score, not NPS of 50 is meant to be excellent. I think like at 70, it's world class. So you can see the Net Promoter of 60 was something that they were very, very proud of in terms of what people thought of the program. So my last slide, if we can move to that, is here. What did participants think? Just like, what about their overall thought about the program? So you can see what some of the responses are here. These are a few of the comments left by participants. And, the Kaiser has felt, very encouraged by the positive feedback they receive through this modality. Now, oftentimes I'm asked, do people really want to talk to a computer? And I've already alluded to this a little bit, but the answer is, if the interaction feels valuable to me, if it's adding value to me, either functionally with my job or even making me feel, giving me positive emotions, then yes, people are more than happy to talk with a chatbot. And in fact, there are some cases where people will prefer talking to a chatbot. I'll give you one quick example and then I'll end my portion of the presentation. There was a consulting firm in the United Kingdom that created a chatbot for new hire onboarding. And they invited new hires to ask the chatbot questions. They said what they found really interesting is that they found some women were asking the chatbot what the cultural norm was for makeup and dress. And this was a surprise to them only because women in the past had not asked this question to human managers. And so because maybe these women felt a little sensitivity about asking a non sort of official policy related question, they felt more comfortable asking the chatbot. And so there are use cases where people do actually feel more comfortable interacting with a computer, but all in all, humans are more effective. But the virtues of a chatbot is if you can figure out how to get a design where people feel the value from those messages, then you can take advantage of the automation, the scalability, and the wonderful technology of chatbots to help support learning and performance. And so with that, if people have questions, I know my time is up, so I'd be happy to answer questions over chat. But also, if someone has a question for me now, I could probably take a minute to answer them.
Hey, Vince, this is Jonathan. I do have a couple of questions for you. Aside from the pilot, when anybody starts to take a program at Kaiser, are they made aware of during the initial training that there will be this follow-up chatbot coaching, or is that sort of just a surprise to them?
Yeah, so they actually they are made aware of it, and in fact, it's an optional service that they can choose to do or not. And so, in the Grow workshop example, the facilitator on towards the end of the workshop introduced Coach Grover and said, "Hey, if you want, we sort of gave you a lot of information in this 1.5-day workshop. If you worry about how to implement it, because once you get back to your desk and there's 1,000 emails waiting for you, we have this chatbot that's going to help you really get the most out of this program. So text this keyword to this phone number if you'd like to participate." And they virtually had 100% people, 100% of the participants opt in.
Great, awesome. I also want to point out, I love the visuals that you incorporated with the chatbots. That's an awesome thing. The other question I had for you was, do you feel there are certain subjects that work better for this than other subjects, or does that not matter?
I think that the only subject where a chatbot will have trouble is where there's so much expertise needed from a human that it's hard to automate. So for example, to have a dramatic example, a chatbot would have a hard time replacing a psychotherapist, for example, or an executive coach. But for almost any other chatbot, any other topic, I think a chatbot can do a wonderful job. And maybe not replace humans altogether, but do a lot of what a human would normally do through automation and through great instructional design.
Okay, and just real briefly, I know you said that these results were great, but were they what you were expecting, or did they do better than what you were expecting?
Yeah, so, Kaiser really was in the driver's seat in terms of both the design and measuring the efficacy of their own design, and they were, this exceeded their expectations, so much so where these stats are actually, I think, about maybe 18 months old now, and they have continued to roll out and support their Grow program, and they've also added 3 other chatbots across their organization. So yeah, they've been very pleased with the ROI of their projects.
Great.
Chatbot.
All right. Vince, thank you for that. That was very informational. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. If there are no other questions, I'm going to hand the baton off to Peter. All right, Peter, you're up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I was double muted. So that was really great, Jonathan and Vince, and it's really interesting because for about a decade, I was in the human performance space, and I was the training product owner for the United States Marine Corps for training systems that were delivered to Marines. And if you know anything about Marines, they're generally, the average age is 25 or less. So they're college age, young men and women. And we were just beginning to introduce chatbot technology and mobile technologies for our enlisted infantry. And one of the things, ironically, that kind of leverages what Vince talked about, one of the things that was really popular was policy instruction on uniforms. So in the Marine Corps and other services, of course, the uniform standards change depending on the season and other conditions. And it's really confusing because there are multiple configurations. So Marines were reluctant to ask their, sergeant, about these uniform standards, but they were really accepting and willing to ask the chatbot for guidance. So it was really beginning to get some traction with our service personnel. So that was very cool. Awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology of learning, but really actually the neurobiology and a little bit of neuroscience of learning. So next slide. So try to tie this together. So one of the things that I think is really important in terms of instructional design that Jonathan talked about, and the applicability of a chatbot and human interaction versus automation, is that learning is really individualized. Many of us think of learning from our experience in school, either secondary, post-secondary, or even college. We think of it as memorization. One of the prevailing theories is really around learning styles. So people are visual learners, auditory. They learn by reading or writing, or through movement and touch, so kinesthetic. But that science was really based on observation of what people were doing and how they're memorizing and learning. But really we learn with our whole body, our whole brain, and different parts of the brain learn in different ways. So if we look to the right side of the screen, the analytical part of our brain, the rational part of our brain, needs to have facts and learns by mental analysis, so thinking. And then that part of the brain needs to see value in the time invested. So as Vince said, I need to feel value from the messages that I'm receiving. And by giving me the option to opt out or opt in, I am in control really of my learning experience. So the analytical part of our brain, that would be important. The conceptual part of our brain likes metaphors and images and learns by experimentation. So the chatbot example, I've got the visual, very friendly Coach Grover. So I can see Coach Grover, I have some interaction, and I can learn through those metaphors and visuals. The structural part of our brain, which is very systematic and practical, needs practice. So the quizzes, for example, and what does the G in GROW stand for? So I get to practice, I'm repeating, and I know what my next steps are. And then the social part of our brain, which is really about relationships between people, being socially aware, learns by doing, sensing, and watching. So as I'm seeing others interact with Coach Grover, for example, I have social proof that this is something good for me. So it really reinforces the relationships between me and the chatbot, me in the context, and really me and the learning experience. So we all learn a little bit differently. We all have all of these ways of thinking and learning, but generally speaking, most people will have preferred ways, and they're not all the same. So the importance of instructional design to cover really all the bases is super important to get the outcomes really that Vince was talking about with Kaiser. Next slide. So beyond our thinking, our behavior also impacts the way we learn. The style and pace affects people in different ways. And movement or the lack of movement is also important. So different parts of, again, the brain and our biology learn in different ways. So the part of our brain, part of our experience that's related to emotions, some of us like to learn one-on-one, and some people need to talk it through. So one of the things that we learned certainly with Marines, so when you have the traditional classroom training, if you will, where I'm the sage on stage, and I get really upset when there's a side conversation, in the room. But that's really important for a lot of learners. So their ability to talk things through helps them kind of embed the learning. Because learning really isn't memorization, it's really an embodied experience. And we're changing the wiring of our brain as we're learning. So we're shaping our biology through all of this. Depending on how someone is thinking about their ideas, thoughts, and feelings, their assertiveness, I may need a quieter, more peaceful kind of experience, so the very friendly chatbot. But if I'm more on the driving side of this assertiveness spectrum, if you will, like in the Marine Corps, I need our chatbots and a lot of our mobile technologies. You had a sergeant or a warrant officer yelling at you. So it was important to have that kind of persona for that particular environment. And then we also can think about it, someone's flexibility. So am I really focused? So I need to do one thing at a time, or can I do many things at a time? So I need to look at different options. So as Vince mentioned, the Grow chatbot was part of a larger program. So I have lots of opportunities, if that's kind of my preference, to learn in multiple ways. And next slide. So this content and really these ideas around neurobiology are based in two primary fields of study. One, looking through the lens of emergenetics, which is a validated psychometric that is based on neuroscience and what we know about the brain, but also the neuroscience of learning from the Neuro Leadership Institute. And what they've found, so as I mentioned, most of our knowledge of human behavior and psychology is based on observation. But more recently, now we can scan brains and see what's really happening kind of underneath the hood. And what the Neuro Leadership Institute found is that there are 4 key aspects to really learning and retention and embodying the learning experience, which is really about changing the brain structures. And those 4 things are attention, generation, emotion, and spacing. So varying the learning techniques provides some novelty that helps keep people attentive. So when I'm receiving the chatbot, for example, or experience a course that's well designed, I'm changing and focusing more often so that I don't get distracted and I don't kind of get lost. So it's keeping my attention, which also has an emotional component. So when I see something that I like, I get a little boost of dopamine, I feel good, and then I want to do it again. So this is often why we see the rise in social media, because it often feels good. So we have this varying the techniques as being important. Generation is really about context and practice. So that structural part of our brain that likes to practice, this is really important. But in the work setting, it needs to be contextual. So one of the things I loved about Vince's discussion was how specific this was really to Kaiser. So generic content really doesn't help with generation. Again, emotions really matter. But the spacing and the repetition between learning events is also very important. So the chatbot example provides nice reinforcement, so that can be spaced over time. So I'm repeating and continuing my learning journey, which is again reinforcing these neural pathways. But one of the things that we almost never talk about is the importance of sleep. So a lot of recent research around the importance of sleep between learning events. And what's happening in our brain is we're kind of cutting off or letting go of maybe some old neural pathways as we're building new ones. So that happens when we sleep. So the cramming and the constant, study that we've all, I'm sure, experienced really isn't that effective. So this kind of micro learning that Vince mentioned, where we're having things in small chunks, in context, in the moment of need, is how we're really building those neural pathways, and having the spacing, the time, and this kind of friendly interaction helps embed what we're really trying to do is affect people in a positive way so that they can learn, practice, and improve in this case, in their performance at work. And I believe that is my last slide. So we can all take a big breath. And exhale. Thank you. If there are, I'll turn it back to Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Peter. I like that acronym, AGES. That I'm going to remember, which is another technique, right, for learning retention, which fits in with our theme today. So awesome. Thank you. All right. We have just a few minutes left. Let me open it up. What questions does anybody have or comments that you'd like to make in the little bit of time we have left?
Jonathan, this is Gabe. If I can make a comment and ask a question.
Absolutely, Gabe.
Wonderful.
Go for it.
First and foremost, I want to thank each one of you, the presenters. I consume information better the way the three of you tag teamed. If I just heard from one person, I kind of check out, but the three of you have different styles and reinforcing. So I really, really love this approach of presentation. So of course I'm biased. So with that said, I want to ask one comment, since this is the only time I'll speak. So Peter, your idea of nap or sleep kind of triggered a consideration. I wonder if you have like a 3-day training or a 2-day training or a 1-day training, give participants a half hour to take a nap, in the middle of learning. I don't know if that will be accepted culturally, but I love the idea, that idea. And with that said, I want to ask if Vince can give maybe a 30-second commercial on mobile coaching, his company, so that, our friendly audience would know how to use his services for training, for service. So we appreciate your kindness, your generosity to present, but please do that 30-second commercial. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm happy just to talk about chatbots. I'm a champion for chatbots overall, but if people are interested in what the work I do, they can go to my company's website, which is www.mobilecoach.com. We are a chatbot authoring platform where instructional designers can go in and design and deploy their own chatbots of every kind. We also have chatbot designers here who provide services to develop chatbots for clients when they need resources to do that. So, so Kaiser, I suppose this was implied, but Kaiser Permanente did use and still does use our platform to maintain and build all their chatbots. And yeah, so mobilecoach.com. Also, anyone can just find me at vince@mobilecoach.com. If you've got questions in general, or if you'd like to see a demonstration of our platform, we'd be happy to accommodate. Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate the chance.
All right, and let's circle back to Peter and not forget you. I think you were going to answer Gabe's curiosity about sleep with training.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Yes, I was just going to make a comment. So especially in this virtual world, when we're presenting virtually or providing interactive training virtually, now we limit sessions to no more than 2 hours. And if we, for whatever reason, need to have more than one session in a day, we take at least a 30-minute break. So it's an opportunity for people to reflect and discuss, take a nap, whatever is going to be the most helpful to them. So having those breaks are super important.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. All right. With that, thank you, everyone, for attending. I'm going to hand it back to Sian to wrap everything up.
Thank you all for the wonderful presentation. I thank you all our participants. Thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to invite you all back next month. Our webinar title will be Innovation and How to Innovate on Thursday, November 19, 2020. We encourage you to tell us what you thought of the webinar today, and please reach out with your name and email address if you need webinar resources. With this, we're going to close today's webinar, and thank you all the panelists. And we'll see you again next month.
Take care.
Thank you.
Many thanks, everybody.